The Villanelle is a form imported into France from Italy in the 16th century, and then from France into England in the 19th century. It changed significantly as it migrated from language to language. The Italian Villanelle was a rustic song or dance from villano, or peasant. The word goes back to the Latin villanus, meaning one bound to the soil of the villa. Came into English from French with the Norman invasion in 1066. It's also the origin of our word villain, one of many examples of how a term used to mark a class status has come to mark not just a person's economic position, but his or her virtue. At first, the Italian and French villanelle had very few rules. It was a poem on a pastoral subject with a refrain. That's it. The rules arrived in the 17th century. As with the sonnet, the rules, half of them anyway, are focused on the rhyme. So it's not a form where you need to be concerned about the meter. There's a lot of repetition, and there are only 2 rhymes. French poets treated it as a stanza form, expanding and contracting it as they saw fit. It's only when the villanelle arrives in England in the 19th century that it becomes a fixed form like the sonnet. By fixed form, I mean it has a set number of lines, and it follows a strict pattern. Here's Theocritus by Oscar Wilde. O singer of Persephone, in the dim meadows desolate, dost thou remember Sicily? Still through the ivy flits the bee, where Amaryllis lies in state. O singer of Persephone, Samatha calls on Hecate, and hears the wild dogs at the gate. Dost thou remember Sicily? Still by the light and laughing sea, poor Polypheme bemoans his fate, O singer of Persephone. And still in boyish rivalry, young Daphnis challenges his mate. Dost thou remember Sicily? Slim Lacon keeps a goat for thee the jocund shepherds wait. O singer of Persephone, dost thou remember Sicily? For Wilde and others in the late 19th century, the form was about sound more than meaning. All this love of curious French meters, like the ballad, the villanelle, the rondelle, he wrote, all this increased value laid on elaborate alliterations and on curious words and refrains, such as you find in Dante Rossetti and Swinburne, is merely the attempt to perfect flute and viol and trumpet, to which the spirit of the age and the lips of the poet may blow the music of their many messages. Theocritus is a pastoral, like the Italian and French villanelles, but with a pattern fixed in the way it has remained ever since. This is the form. 19 lines, 5 stanzas of 3 lines each, followed by a 4-line stanza called an envoy. The word envoy also means ambassador, and that's sort of how envoys in poetry function. They serve the main body of the poem and are used to send off a message. The 3-line stanzas all rhyme A-B-A. The envoy rhymes A-B-A-A. With the Oscar Wilde poem, Persephone rhymes with Sicily for the A rhyme. Desolate and in state rhyme to set up the B rhyme, and so on throughout the poem. As we have discussed, writing a poem with very few rhymes is a challenge in English. The villanelle is even more challenging in this regard than the sonnet, since you only get 2 rhymes instead of 4, 5, or 7 as in the sonnet. But wait, there's more. The villanelle is also built on repetition. The first line repeats as the 6th, 12th, and 18th lines. The third line repeats as the 9th, 15th, and 19th lines. So, why would any poet shackle himself to such a straitjacket of a form? Think about how a tight, constraining form can be a gift to a poet as much as it is a burden. Here's one by the brilliant Irishman Paul Muldoon, a witty, complicated trickster of a poet. As he knelt by the grave of his mother and father, the taste of dill or tarragon, he could barely tell one from the other, filled his mouth. It seemed as if he might smother. Why should he be stricken with grief? Not for his mother and father, but a woman slinking from the fur of a sea otter in Portland, Maine, or, yes, Portland, Oregon. He could barely tell one from the other. And why should he now savor the tang of her little pickled gherkin, as he knelt by the grave of his mother and father? He looked about. He remembered her palaver on how both earth and sky would darken. You could barely tell one from the other, while the monarch butterflies passed over in their milkweed hunger. A wing beat, some reckon, may trigger off the mother and father of all storms, striking your Irish cliffs of moor with the force of a hurricane. Then milkweed and monarch invented each other. He looked about, cow's parsley in a samovar. He'd mistaken his mother's name, Regan, for anger. As he knelt by the grave of his mother and father, he could barely tell one from the other. What the... Read that one over a dozen or more times if you like puzzles and games. I just offer it here as an example of how the Villanelle is alive and well, and despite its Renaissance origins, can be put to postmodern use.